Good afternoon, STCC faculty and staff, friends, community members, and little ones who are nearby. My name is Vanetta Lightfoot, and I am the Multicultural Affairs Operations Manager here at STCC. And on behalf of the Office of Multicultural Affairs, I would like to welcome you here today. And thank you for participating in the Heart of a Man series entitled Black and Blue Part 2, a dialogue on police violence and men of color. This session is a continuation of the rich conversation we had on December 3rd, 2020. I would like to thank all of you for helping to create such a powerful space for men to share their stories and create avenues for change. I am so proud to say that we have reached over 4,100 views on YouTube since the series began in October. And now we are back this spring with more sessions and wonderful new speakers. I also want to give a huge thank you to my team, Cindy and James, for helping me to realize my vision for this series and for all the hard work and dedication that is put into each and every session. It is a pleasure to work with you both, and thank you so much for your support. Last but certainly not least, I would like to thank our panelists, Kobe, Anthony, Jose, and Justin. You all are amazing, and I appreciate you so much for agreeing to do this without hesitation. And I'm so excited for what you will bring to the conversation. Thank you so much. I'm also very excited to share with you that through a generous STCC Foundation Innovation Grant, we have created the STCC Heart to Heart Focus Group, which is an initiative seeking to strategically engage male students of color in holistic support for retention, while also developing a shared commitment to ending gender-based violence. For more information on this initiative, please visit the Heart to Heart Focus Group page on the STCC website. One of the goals of Heart of a Man is to promote and support the Male Initiative for Leadership and Education, known as MILE. The MILE program is designed to provide inclusive academic support, mentoring, and community engagement opportunities to male students at STCC. MILE is always looking for students to participate in the program. For more information, please visit the MILE website on our STCC website, and the link will be in the chat. Now I would like to introduce my co-creator, my colleague, my friend, Cindy Brunig, to share more about #StickWeCan and to introduce our moderator.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cindy Brunig, and I am the project director for the Office of Violence Against Women Campus Program Grant, or OVW Grant, which seeks to strengthen both prevention and response to dating violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking through campus and community partnerships. #StickWeCan is an initiative of this grant, and it seeks to create an engaged campus community where each and every one of us can do our part to prevent sexual and relationship violence. We deeply believe that men, as both survivors and allies, play a critical role as leaders in the work to end these forms of violence, and we believe that together we can be the change we want to see in the world. When we launched the series last fall, the first 2 sessions dove into the heart of social norms around gender, identity, and relationships that have a direct connection to the prevalence of what we call gender-based violence, specifically dating, domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. In both Black and Blue Part 1, as well as today's session, Black and Blue Part 2, we will continue to weave this thread into the dialogue, exploring the angle of how the impacts of trauma through institutionalized racism shape the ability for victims and survivors to be able to access safety, services, and support in the community. We are so grateful to our panelists for their willingness to engage from the heart and help us to gain more insight into these intersections in order that we may find ways to actively and intentionally contribute to creating safer communities for all. I continue to be so proud to be a part of this series, which we hope is the very beginning, planting seeds that will grow into a longer term conversation on our campus. Now I am honored to introduce our moderator for today, James Lightfoot III. James is currently the Director of Education and Youth Programs for the Urban League of Springfield. James is an advocate, consultant, and mentor for youth and young adult males in programs. We now hand it off to you, James.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Cindy, for that introduction. Today's session is entitled Black and Blue Part 2, a dialogue on police violence and men of color. Our session will feature a panel of men from diverse backgrounds, professions, and experiences who will share their voices and engage in dialogue with participants. Today's wonderful panel includes Dr. Kobe Stewart. He's Assistant Professor and Coordinator for Criminal Justice at Asnuntuck Community College. Dr. Anthony Guillory, Adjunct Faculty and History Professor at STCC. Justin Hertz, President of the Springfield City Council, educator and entrepreneur. And Jose Lopez Figueroa, Director for the Center for Access Services at STCC. I'm excited to welcome our panelists here today, and I know we'll have a very rich dialogue. Now, before we begin, I would like to go over the format for today's session. We will begin in webinar format, which means your video and audio are muted or disabled while our panelists are speaking. After we hear from each of our panelists, we will transition into a Q&A portion, which will allow you as our audience to ask questions and have them answer. Please be encouraged throughout the session to put your questions in the comments, in the chat, or in the Q&A box so that we can get to them at the end of the session. They will be monitored while we are talking. Now, a lot has gone on since our first Black and Blue session. Let's see. The nation has continued to bear witness to the unreadiness to reform modern-day policing practices. We've witnessed a violent insurrection at the US Capitol and ongoing use of force lawsuits, trials, and deaths of unarmed Black and brown men. As images of the violent mob storming the US Capitol spread widely, a stark contrast has been drawn between how police responded to the Black Lives Matter protests of the summer and the lack of law enforcement preparation for that armed mob. We have continued to see this over and over, where there has been little or no response to certain scenarios and an over-response in other situations where the parties involve gatherers of color. In our last conversation on this theme, we looked at the traumas caused by police violence, the necessities required to assist in the prevention of police violence, and the response expected but not always received from police. The impacts are extensive and the need for change and reform is urgent. Today, we will look to dive more into these occurrences and hear from our panelists as we unpack the expectations, realities, and impacts the current models have on the communities of color. So we'll begin. Our first panelist, Mr. Kobe Stewart.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for returning to our Black and Blue conversation. So I want to start off this with our first question. What is your earliest memory of what you were taught about the police? And how has your direct experiences with the police impacted both your personal and professional relationship to law enforcement?
First of all, thank you for having me again. It's definitely a pleasure to share the panel with Anthony, Justin, and Jose. These talks and this conversation is extremely important, not only to communities of Black and brown, but also policing, law enforcement, the criminal justice system, in our country as a whole. So getting right into it, my upbringing and my influence was my mother. You know, she was a single parent, HBCU alum, and she kind of came along during the civil rights era, the Black Panther movement. I often, you know, joke with her about Angela Davis being her role model. So, you know, we talked about, or she talked about racism. She talked about relationships with police, but she also told me, don't get in trouble, keep your nose clean, do what you're supposed to do, and then you won't have a problem. And so my early on idea of, or perception of police wasn't bad. And as I got older, you know, that perception changed a little bit. I went to a predominantly white high school, and I knew right on that my classmates, some of my white friends, didn't experience the things that I was experiencing. They didn't have the same conversations that I had with my mother, my grandparents, my friends. They didn't have those concerns. But I also started to have negative experiences with police or law enforcement at that time. But I'm also from the hip hop era, right? So we're talking Public Enemy, KRS-One, Tribe Called Quest, Queen Latifah, NWA. So they brought a lot of the issues with communities of color to the forefront, right? Talking about some of the issues and inequities that was going on. And folks didn't want to hear some of that stuff. But it really resonated to me because they spoke like me, they looked like me, and they were talking about experiences that I had, that friends had, that family members had, you know, so it really, I felt connected to it. And so, you know, I go on to college and experiencing some of the same things. And these things are starting to project a negative ideology about law enforcement. And I say law enforcement, I'm not just talking about police. I'm talking about correctional system, courts, as well as policing, because the criminal justice system is part of three components. And then I actually started working in law enforcement and working juvenile detention first, and then going into corrections. So I have a unique perspective. So I'm looking at both sides of it. And you know what I do now is you know I teach prospective law enforcement officers and folks who want to work in the court system and folks who want to work in corrections. And these are young people. So my influence in who I am as a African American male, also the coordinator of a criminal justice department, is extremely important. You know, I think I said the last one. I'm sometimes I'm the first person of color, teacher of color that some of these students have ever had. And also some of the African American or students of color they've ever seen in a faculty role. So it's extremely important of how I disseminate the information. Right now, there's a big discussion about diversity and diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially when we're talking higher ed. But I know that even if it's entrenched in the curriculum, my delivery is much different than someone else's. Okay, so my relationship with law enforcement has been good and bad, but I look at what I do now is extremely important because my connection to law enforcement in the communities, it builds a bridge. Okay, and I'll often tell my students, you're the change agents in this field. So a lot of these conversations and discussions that we're having in class are waking them up to what they're going to have to deal with when they go and work in the field. It's not easy, you know, and it's extremely important for me to disseminate that information correctly and be unapologetic about some of the assignments or experiences that I share with students. So my experience has been good and bad, but I look at what I do in my experience to really build a bridge between communities of color, non-communities of color, and law enforcement and policing.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Kobe. And your presence, I would say, matters in this space for all those students that are coming in contact with you. And hopefully today some students or community members who are watching understand the role that educators play in this on the outside of the actual physical the presence of law enforcement, as you name the various levels. So thank you for sharing that. Next, we'll have Dr. Anthony Guillory.
Greetings all. Thank you, Vanetta, Cindy, James, John, my boy John. We've done a lot of programs together. Now that I transitioned to a digital stick presence, right? I still think about the time that we had there when I was there on campus, and I relish those moments we had. And then thank you to the panel. I'm eager to be here and to engage with you all, and I'm thankful that y'all had me or had me to participate in this. Yeah, it was an honor to be asked, and so I hope that I can contribute something meaningful. Is it the same?
Yeah, so it's going to be the same question. What is your earliest memory of what you were taught about the police, and how have your direct experiences with the police impacted both your personal and professional relationship to law enforcement today?
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So I grew up raised by my mother. We were very poor. I think my mother made $19,000 a year when we were small children. I remember when she got her $8 raise and how excited she was. So my earliest, I was born in '85, right, which is significant because I was born during the war on drugs. And I lived in, right, a very low income, primarily African-American and Mexican-American community. So my earliest experiences with the police, threefold, okay? On the one hand, I knew the police could kick you out your house. I knew the police as the constable, right? So I don't know, I didn't see this when I was there in Massachusetts, right? I was doing a little bit better, so I didn't have to deal with eviction notices. But when I was small, we were often being evicted. And it was the police officer, right? He come over he was from the sheriff's office, and he come over. And the first time he came over, he put a huge sticker on your door. One of those where you couldn't just take it off. And it says evicted, and of course it was meant to embarrass you. And then if you didn't either work out whatever it is that you had to work out with the apartment complex, or you didn't move out, they come and take your door off. And so you just be in a dwelling with no door. Now this is Texas, right? So, however hot or however cold it was, that's what it was in my apartment. And I remember that from a very, very young age. I also remember being told, right, as a way of trying to keep me out of trouble, as a way of trying to keep me from being a victim to the war on drugs, these horror stories about jail and prison. And I might be the only one on the panel that experienced this, but there was this stereotype of homosexual men that was wielded as a weapon to try to keep me out of jail. It was all this constant threat that these homosexual men operating as sexual predators, enhanced by the prison industrial complex, were waiting on me, right, at a very young age, and that they were going to rape me, right, over and over again, right? And the police were the mechanism through which they were going to be able to have access to my body. So I was taught to fear the police, right? As part of this, right, extended, right, homophobia, right, that persisted in my community. And then I was exposed to hip hop music like Kobe was. I watched a bunch of hood movies, right? John Singleton films, right? Where you saw the depiction of the increased or over policing of African-American spaces. You saw, right, the consequences, if not factually based, anecdotal, of young men, right, being perceived as criminals, being perceived as thugs, being perceived as drug dealers, right? And then they were, having to, negotiate a space of high, heavy policing, right? I also grew up at a time during the crack epidemic. And again, I'm in a very low income space. And so it was during the crack epidemic that, the drug dealer existed, and the drug dealer was the only one around us that made money. And so, I didn't know what crack was. I didn't know what drugs were in particular, but I knew that he had the best clothes on, and I knew he had the best car, right? I don't know how big Base was in Springfield, Massachusetts, but in Texas, Base is still king, and his whole trunk had subwoofers in it. And so, and then, so the really, really, really cool guy, right? The guy that was helping us shape and mold our perceptions of masculinity, right, was on the block one day. And then one day he wasn't, right? And we knew that it was the police that took him away, right? As I got older and I started looking at, historical texts, civil rights movement, Malcolm X, urban history. I started learning about people like Fred Hampton. I started learning about people like Stokely Carmichael and, Bobby Seale, right? Huey P. Newton, and I knew Angela Davis, and I knew that they had these ridiculous confrontations with the police. Later on, from Angela Davis, I learned about Assata Shakur. I learned about the shootout she had with the New Jersey State Police, right? In her autobiography, she talks about how the New Jersey State Police were infiltrated by former Nazi soldiers. She says she remembers being in a prison. She was severely wounded, and as a matter of fact, she lost mobility in her arm, and so she remembers being in a semi-conscious state in a hospital bed, and there was a shift change between the police officers who were guarding her door, right? And she says that she, saw them greet each other and then do the Heil Hitler, right, exchange as they walked away. And so as I'm getting into my formative years, right, I have my personal experiences with the police, right? I have these anecdotal experiences with the police. I have mass media, right? And the images those created. And then I'm seeing these things in the text that I'm reading, where in which the police are the devil, right? The police are, perceived to, or at least they came across to me as the ones that could stop your life, right? And it really wasn't an issue of morality, right? It was an issue of affinity. The people that I revered the most had these horrific consequences, right, in their engagement with the police. And so as I got older and I developed and, started making money and, I have to engage the police in a very different way, right? I'm able to reason that not all police are bad. I'm able to have engagements with police officers that are civil, right? But just last year, I had an encounter with a police officer who approached me in a very threatening manner. For nothing that I did in particular, right? The story is, I think I have a little bit more time to talk about it now than later. One of my neighbors, with whom I have a great, rapport. I was living in South Dallas when I first moved back to Texas, and he had a living girlfriend, and she had a son, and her son decided he wanted to be the man of the house, and my neighbor and the son got into it. The son calls the police, says that my neighbor has a gun. DeSoto police rush onto our cul-de-sac in our apartment complex. They they go and they talk to my neighbor. It's like 3 or 4 officers talking to him. They're patting him down for a gun. And so I go outside to ensure that he's going to be okay. And out of nowhere, a police officer who had nothing to do with my neighbor, had nothing to do with the scene at all. He was just there. He comes over to me, got his hand on his clip. My hand is in my pocket. I have my cell phone in my hand, right? But I have on these like jogger shorts, something where I couldn't hide a pistol, right? You'd see it. But nevertheless, I have my hand in my pocket. I have my cell phone in my hand, and he comes over. He has his hand on his clip, and he's threatening to shoot me unless I keep my hand in my pocket. He has on this Blue Lives Matter face covering, these sunglasses. You know, he looks like a Nazi, or a Klansman, whatever. I asked him, I said, why did you even come over here to talk to me? Several of my neighbors are outside because we want to see the spectacle, right? I'm there because I want to make sure that my neighbor's okay, but nevertheless, so why did you come over here to talk to me? And so he has nothing intelligent to say on the matter. And I told him, I said, he told me, he said, you need to go back to your house. I said, you need to go back to your community. I said, you're not welcome here. I said, I know that Blue Lives Matter means that you're a racist. And I said, and you're only acting like this because you think you can get away with it. And so then I asked him for his badge number. And then, bless his heart, he refuses to give it to me. I asked him for a copy. Then he tells me, you can get it off the police report, but of course he doesn't want to give me that. But fortunately, right, another police officer who was there came and spoke to me and told me what I needed to do to actually get, to file a complaint against this guy, and I did. But yeah, so I've had these experiences, no doubt. Some positive, sure, like Kobe said, but some negative, right? But I think, and I spoke on this several years ago, it's part of African-American folklore to be leery of the police. And it's unfortunate that however educated we are, however civil we are, I have on a t-shirt today, but there was a time when I walked around with nothing but bow ties on, and I still had to face that same type of scrutiny. And it's unfortunate that there's nothing we can do to negotiate this space, right? Other than to just fear for the day where they come for us. Anyway, thank you.
No doubt. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. There's a lot packed in there. And to sum it up is like, we can't run from it. It's inevitable for some of these experiences, and so unfortunate. So thank you for sharing in this space, and hopefully that helps open the eyes to some folks of some common experiences that we as men of color, as Black men, experience. So thank you for sharing in that space. We'll have our next panelist share with us, Jose, Mr. Jose Lopez Figueroa.
Good afternoon. Hi, everybody.
Hey, thank you for being here. So we're going to continue this same line of questioning here, just to get some your earliest memories of what you were taught about the police, and how have your direct experiences with the police impacted both your personal and professional relationships to law enforcement.
Yeah, thanks, James. And let me thank everybody here. It's honestly a pleasure to be on this panel with 3 men whom I have gotten to know over my career and learn from and admire dearly. They're 3 men of high intelligence that, as I'm listening, continuing to learn from them. So I want to thank Vanetta, James, Cindy, and everyone for inviting me to this panel to share my experience, but then also to learn. Right, I see myself as a participant. Similar to Dr. Guillory, right? I'm an 80s baby, 90s raised, right? More on drugs and hip hop era. I would say that my earliest memory of the police, or at least learning about the police, was through TV. The show Cops, right? Cops at that time it was hot. It was popping. Unfortunately, I wasn't taught about law enforcement at home. you know, I had a very strong mother. My mother was a single parent of three. We lived in the projects, one of the projects complex in Worcester, Massachusetts. And it was very diverse, heavy Latino, heavy Black, African American, right? Um, but my mother oftentimes had to work multiple jobs, right, to make ends meet. So I don't know that there was um, time or place or opportunity to have that discussion because it, my mother was on the grind to make sure there was food on the table, right? Um, Growing up in the projects, SNAP benefit or food stamps at the time, right? You got that little food stamp book in the mail, and that was payday. Yeah, you know, the monopoly money. So that was like my upbringing. So really, my first learning lesson of the police was cops, was the show Cops, which is, we all know, an extremely racist, biased program because essentially what you saw was predominantly white male officers beating on Black and brown folks, right? And that's really what it was. So that was my, I think my, what I learned of and who the police were, and kind of um, took that to the outside world. Growing up in the projects, we saw police was daily, right? And so we actually had an officer in the projects. It was like a remote office in the projects. So we saw it daily. And I remember me and my friends, anytime there was always either a raid or something going on. And my friends and I, as soon as we heard the sirens, we'd run out because we want to go see what's going on. Because why? Because in our minds, cops is about to happen in real life. And so we go run to whose door they kicking in, or that, you know what, we're living in the projects. Are they in the high rise? Where are they going? And we're following because we're trying to go see. You know, they bring in the canines. Um, and so speaking of that, the canines, that was, you know, I think one of the more traumatizing experiences that I'd encountered. Right. So I remember being at a park one day, playing ball. I must have been 10 years old. I was a young kid. A park near the house, and the cops show up, and you know they're kind of just what seemed to be pretending to be community officers, right? And they were talking. All of a sudden, they break out and they start chasing one of the dudes playing ball, Latino, and they chase them into a building. Fast forward, they pulled them out with the canine in cuffs. And I remember that story when the George Floyd incident happened because that individual was in cuffs. And so now I think to myself, why the hell was the dog still on his leg if he's in cuffs, right? And so, and we all know why, right? You want to make sure that you know who you're dealing with. Stay in your lane, right? So, and I remember that the guy screaming to get the dog, you know, get the effing dog off of me. He's in cuffs, and the dog, you know, his leg is the chew toy. So, unfortunately, as a young age, those were my experiences of what I learned of police officers, and I didn't learn of them to protect and serve. For me, they were, you do something bad, they come to beat you down. I mean that was, it was kind of plain and simple in my aspect. Through high school, very diverse high school. We had a pretty diverse high school. Law enforcement presence, or rather police presence in the high school was not uncommon. Many times fights during school resulted in not school administrators handling it, but local PD handling a backyard school fight as a criminal matter. So, you know, you got into a fight in school, you very easily could have been arrested for it and potentially hit with some assault and battery charges, right? So that was that. And then, you know, going on into college, and in my older teen years, especially as I started to drive, uh, I would say two significant moments in my life of where I fit the description of where I actually feared for my life, right? So the very first moment I was in college and I took a drive out to visit a female friend, a white female friend in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. Hopkinton, Massachusetts is in a very affluent white community. Um, it's actually where the Boston Marathon begins, just for geographic perspective. Um, and so I get there, and I'm driving a beat up Saturn and a hoopty, and I get there, and an unmarked cruiser comes behind me, and I'm on the phone with this young woman, and I say, hey, I start panicking. I got an unmarked cruiser. Well, we don't have unmarked cruisers in this town. I was like, well, you got one today. And he's behind me. And she brushes me off. You're being ridiculous. Stop it. Like, you know, don't pull the race card in my town. We're not a racist community. You know, we have a lot of Jewish people here. So we're not racist, right? And kind of pulling those cards. And I'm like, listen, I'm not joking. I have an unmarked cruiser behind me and he's going to pull me over. I need to hurry up and get to your house because that's the only place that I would feel safe. And so sure enough, I pass her house and now I have to turn around. And there's no way in hell I'm turning around with this guy behind me. I pull down a side street. It's a relatively wooded area. And he pulls out into a wooded spot. And I see him. I have to turn around. So I turn around and he sees me. And now I'm scared because I have to go back down where he pulled off. And I have to pass him. And I already knew as soon as I do that, he's getting me. So what I told the young lady, I said, do me a favor. Just please do me a favor. Get your mom, get your dad, and come to the driveway. Because I'm going to speed past this dude, and I'm pulling into your driveway. He's going to come behind me, and it's going to be an incident. But I need you guys to be there because I knew I would be safe with them, right? I would be safe with these white folks, right? And so it happened exactly like that. You know, I passed them, pulled into the driveway, and he came speeding in with lights on. Sure enough, they learned that, yes, their small town had an unmarked cruiser. And so I get out of the car. He gets out yelling, get back in your car. And the mom came running down the steps into the driveway. And for me, it was like savior. I was like, yes, I'm good, right? And she actually had gone to high school with the officer. She called him by his first name. No, he's with us. Stop it. You're being ridiculous, blah, blah, blah. And I'll be in touch with Greg or whatever name she said. Come to find out, Greg was like the chief of police of the town. So it was that type of community. And at that point I was safe. I was like, I know I'm safe. And really the mom just put that cop in check. And I was like, yes, right. I didn't know what I was experiencing, right? Later to learn that that's that white privilege, right? Like she wore her skin that day and put that cop in check, right? So that was that. And then, you know, I think my perception started going downhill. But at the same time, I was also pursuing a career in law enforcement. So I was going to school for criminal justice to become a cop. And I guess my mindset was become a cop to change within, right? And I was thinking at a very micro level, like, oh, if I become a cop, I can help, and not really thinking about at the macro level, it's a systemic thing. And by me becoming a cop, would I actually be helping, right? You know, fast forward, my next encounter was another small, predominantly white, affluent community in Holland, Mass. And this one, I was actually working at Stick at the time. This was back in 2016, I want to say. I was driving home and I was followed by an officer. In both situations, by the way, I fit the description. That was the reason for the stop. I fit the description. And so I was renting a house. I pulled into the driveway. Officer knocks on my door, has his gun unclipped, has his hand on his gun and tells me to come out. I have my hands up and I have no idea what's going on. I tell him I'm not coming out. I don't feel safe. And he then comes into the house and grabs me and places me in cuffs, right? And because I fit the description, you know, so those incidents, you know, I think really shaped my perspective. And so the way my relationship now, I would say it's a love-hate relationship. I have friends that are law enforcement that do great things, but I do sometimes, I think, battle with the idea of my feelings. I don't know if I've yet defined my feelings towards law enforcement, other than I don't know that I fully trust them, and I don't know that I would call them to my house for help, per se. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jose, and thanks for sharing of those experiences. Definitely that whole, and it sounds like, you know, we're starting to hear this common theme, especially from our last two panelists, of that idea of fitting the description, or the description that has been made up to be fearful of. You know, and so yet again, unfortunate situation that men of color have to experience. So we're going to hear from our final panelists here. And Jose, I say thank you again. We'll have Justin Hurst. Please join us.
How we doing, James?
Good, good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, doing good.
Excellent.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Indeed. We'll wait for your video here. I'm not seeing you yet.
Is it? Let me try again. Are you not able to see me?
I don't see you yet. Oh, I see you here. All right, there we go.
All right. You're scaring me, James.
I just have to switch the spotlight, but we got you. So,
okay.
Same question, and I don't want to rob you of time, but we do have some other things we want to get to. But I mean, and I don't want to shortchange any of this because these experiences are very valuable to this space and us being able to share and have these like experiences. So I don't want you to shortchange what you have to share. We just want to be mindful. Otherwise, we'll have our audience until 5 o'clock.
I was going to say, no worries. Unfortunately, you saved the politician for last. Yeah. And so we we know no time limits, but I definitely would shorten it since I was on the last panel. I want to start off by saying I appreciate Stick and Dr. Cook for you guys actually having this forum. I mean, it gives us an opportunity to talk about issues that many people don't want to talk about and many people don't want to deal with. And the reality is we face these issues on a regular basis, as you've heard from our panelists before me. I also want to thank you, James, Vanetta, Cindy, to the panelists, Kobe, grew up with, Jose, and Dr. Guillory. Your stories are eerily similar to many of those that I've gone through growing up. I was listening to Dr. Guillory, and he said he's still leery today, and we have good reason to be leery of police officers. When you start to talk about the incidents that you had, and I reflect on some of my own experiences, there's good reason. And I think the frustrating part about it is it doesn't matter how much education you have, right? It doesn't matter what your professional career is. Before you have these interactions, it's not like the police officer is able to research your resume and what you bring to the table, which is, certainly part of the problem and unfortunate. In terms of my interactions early on with the police, I was thinking about why I didn't have deep conversations with my parents about the police. And you're talking about working class parents who were activists, working class parents who were involved in their community and understood the dynamic between police officers and communities of color. And so growing up, I really didn't have a negative experience as a child, other than the fact that I remember my father calling the cops on individuals who were hustling next door, and you could just tell that it pained him, right? And he had done everything in his power, to move us out of the inner city, where you would expect much of this to occur, and moved us to the outskirts in Pine Point, and to only have folks hustling right across the street, it was extremely frustrating for him. And so whenever he did call the cops, which was far and few in between, you could just tell that there was this there was this pain that he endured, right? Like he really didn't want to call the cops because he knew the potential of what the cops might do. But at the same time, he didn't want his young kids and the neighborhood kids being exposed to what he was trying to get away from. So, so I did have that experience, and I looked at cops as, individuals that enforce the law. And it wasn't until I was a senior in high school, I had my license. I was picking up a good friend of mine down in the South End of Springfield, and I was traveling from the South End to get on the highway by YMCA to head back to my house, and I noticed in the rearview mirror that the cop was following me. And when you grow up, certainly in Springfield, I mean, you're mindful of the police. You know that you know to look in your rearview mirror regularly, just to see who might be following you. And so I picked him up at the McDonald's in the South End, and then I watched him tail me all the way up until we got to the YMCA. He finally pulls me over. It's pouring down rain. I'll never forget it. And when he pulls myself and a good friend of mine over, I'm sitting here thinking, looking at my man, like, what'd you do? You know, did you do something? And he's saying there like, no, I didn't do anything. So anyhow, you know, he runs our plates. But before he runs our plates and runs my license, he makes us get out of the car, and we stand at the back of the hood, my friend and my good friend and I, and we're out there in the pouring rain. And he sits there. I know my stuff is clean. I mean, I only had my license for a couple months, and he has us out there in the pouring rain with our hands on the trunk of our cars for close to 20 to 30 minutes. And I'm like, this can't possibly be what police officers are paid and trained to do. Like, this just can't be their role. You fast forward that a year later, I'm coming back from my first year at Jacksonville University. I'm going to hang out with one of my friends. Now, listen, he's not the he's not the most upstanding guy. I get it. But I walk into the building on Worthington Street, spend, roughly an hour there, come back out. And I mean, this is Christmas, right? And so I come back out, and next thing I know, I cross the street and, get on the ground, take your socks and shoes off. They had me stripped to my tank top, and I'm sitting here like it's 20 degrees out. Like like you haven't even asked me any questions yet, and yet you have me on the floor with my socks and shoes off, searching me. And so that incident didn't end well. And so we start talking about how you end up having these perceptions of the police. Those two incidents were extremely negative. You follow that up with the last incident that I think was the one that resonated with me the most, was when I was driving a few friends of mine back home from college at the University of Virginia. And we get off at the exit because we're ready to call their parents. They lived in New York, in New Jersey, so that we could have them meet them and let them know that we were on our way. We didn't have. I don't think we had cell phones back then. So we had to stop off and call them from a payphone in the gas station. And so anyhow, neither here nor there. I'm coming out of the gas station. I don't know where I'm at. I never get off an exit again unless it's an actual main exit off of the highway. That's the sad part. You talk about trauma. And so I was turning. So I was headed back to the highway. End up going the wrong way on a one-way street. And not knowing, and the police pulls me over. Uses his bullhorn. The other kids are in the car. They don't know what's happening now. And so he orders all of us to get out of the car. He puts the handcuffs on us. We sit down while he goes through the car. And when I say he doesn't just go through the car, he knows that there are drugs in the car. I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I please don't have, please, I'm hoping I didn't leave anything from the night before, which I had unfortunately did. I had a bag of weed. And we had just finished finals, and so neither here nor there, the weed was in the console. But before he even got to the console, I mean, he's ripping up the entire car, assuming that I have something illegal on me. So wrapping the story up, so he has the cuffs on us. He finds the bag of weed, puts us in the back of the cruiser, and he has this German Shepherd that is just about licking our faces. I mean, you're talking about we're 17, 18 years old, just about licking our faces in the back seat of the cruiser as we're on our way to the station. And then when it was all said and done, we ended up being chained to the bench for a good 2 hours until we got our phone call to call our parents, and they ultimately let us go. So anyhow, all of those three experiences really shaped my perception of the police. And it wasn't until I ended up running for city council that I realized that I needed to find a way to change my view and not generalize that all officers are like the ones in which I encountered. And so that has been a struggle ever since. And because of the nature of my profession, I hear incidents that occur on a regular basis. And I think my job is tough from that standpoint, because I know that we have some good officers out here. But unfortunately, you know, I hear the experiences of those that are not doing the right thing. So difficult, you know, it's a difficult balance, but you know, it's one that you know, one that I asked for. So with that said, James, I'll stop and we can get to the next questions.
Excellent. Justin, thank you so much. And I just want to, you know, go back and thank everyone who shared, you know, a bit of their story and, you know, how their early experiences and expectations were, you know, unfortunately summed up in some traumatizing experiences, you know. And just one note, I was listening to some of the statements. Kobe shared that input of don't get in trouble and keep your nose clean. Something that, you know, you think about, you know, this bit of information, like, what do you mean? Like, you know, keep my nose clean, but, you know, stay out of trouble, stay away from things that can harm you. And never does that conversation go into being aware of who you are and what skin you're in. And that may be the very thing that is considered a trouble, you know, or something that will automatically put you in a position where someone thinks you're up to no good, right? And then I think, I won't say I think, you know, I thought Dr. Guillory Anthony was leading to one of those scared straight moments. Remember, as a young man, I'm raised by a police officer. So hearing some of your feedback, I'm like, wow, you know, I didn't see much of this, but later in life, I became aware and learned that all of those called to serve and protect are not doing that, right? But remember an instance of showing or seeing the scared straight video, and have had a moment of that. My father took me to the station and walked me through the jail to really get a taste to be like, you know, is this what you want? And I was like, you know, there's much more to that story, but I was like, nah, I need to, you know, do the right thing and keep my nose clean, stay out of trouble. But it's this way that the criminal justice system has been shown to us in this fearful way, as opposed to what their slogan says, serve and protect, that puts us in these positions to, you know, have this weird, I'll say, experience of trust, you know, with police. So again, thank you all for what you've shared. We're going to move on to our next session or next question here. In this part, we'll have all the panelists in. We're about to sit around the table or sit in a barbershop, but be in this space together, you know, where we can have some conversation. So there won't be any, you know, you first, you second. You know, we can pop in and, you know, share as you please, comment, and we'll just, you know, keep the conversation moving. We have about 2 or 3 parts to this one, so I won't belabor it. I'll get to it. So can I have all the panelists, you know, turn their video on? All right, we're all here. Cool. All right, so kind of first question to open up this is, how have experiences of racialized trauma impacted the way you actively talk to or will talk to your own children about law enforcement?
I'll
No,
go ahead, Dr. Guillory.
No, go ahead, Jose. I'm good.
Yeah, I actually have an incident, right, that I remember. And actually, I want to say, Justin, as you were speaking about your moment when you were arrested, that was a flashback for me, because I unfortunately spent a night in jail. White cop just wanted to use me as an example. At the end of that, I took the cop to trial and beat the case because he had nothing on me. other than I fit the description, but certainly spending a good, I think, 12 hours overnight in jail was not a pleasant experience to deal with the police. So because of that, I'll say I actually had this conversation with my nephew, who is now going on 16, but at the time he was 14, and my sister, who's a great mom, single mom, great mom, very engaged in her kid's life. But as a 14-year-old black male, my nephew is black Latino. He wanted to go out with his boys to the mall and to the movies. And so my sister told me about it. And so she's like, do you mind having a conversation with him? Now I know him, he likes to wear his backpack. I called him, I said, yeah, your backpack's a weapon. Do not take your backpack to the mall. Do not take it to the movie theaters because it will be perceived as a weapon and will be used against you. To the point where the conversation, like I asked him what kind of sneakers he's gonna wear. You gonna wear Jordans? Uh, your pants? Are you wearing a hoodie? These are because I knew, right. It kind of I thought about the moment that when I was a teenager and I was arrested, right. I thought about that and I'm like, listen, anything you got is gonna be a weapon, right? So the conversation was, if you get stopped by the police, you only say one thing: please call my mom. I am a minor. That's it. You don't answer any other questions. You don't give them your name. And I even told them, don't even look at them. Keep your head down. Keep your hands outside of your pocket. Don't ever give the officer your back. Address them as yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, and just simply say, I'm a minor. Please call my mother. And do not say anything else. Do not make any movements. Just stand still. If he tells you to leave, you walk immediately the other way. You don't look back, and you get to the nearest phone and you call mom. And it's sad. I feel like it was sad that I had to have that conversation with him because he was going to the mall and to the movies, and he was disappointed. He's like, "Why can't I bring my backpack?" And I bet I was like, John, please don't bring your backpack. Just don't do it, right? And even to the point of sneakers, right? Preferably try not to wear any flashy Jordans. Just try to dress simple and try not to have a reason for them to pick you out. But I would say, yeah, that my son is too. So luckily, I yet to have that conversation with him. But I did have to have that conversation with my nephew, which was definitely a tough pill to swallow.
So I have a 4-year-old daughter, and she's mixed race, Afro Latina. My daughter is she's gender non-conforming. My daughter does not like pink. She doesn't want to hear anything about being a princess. My daughter loves that daddy lifts weights. My daughter loves violent cartoons. And when she learned about civil servants in school, she loved learning about the firemen and she loved learning about the police officers. She has a game on her tablet where she's a police officer driving a car and she runs down a criminal. And I spoke to a mother about this. I'm like, I don't want to rob her, right, of, this, I'm not going to call it innocence, right? I'm not going to rob her of this opportunity to view these civil servants as potentially good people. She couldn't understand. She was home with me when I had the encounter that I mentioned previously with the police. And when I called the police officer to report the internal affairs to report the incident, I told the guy that I spoke to, I said, I don't want to have to teach my daughter to be fearful of the police. And I don't want to have to teach my daughter that the police are an enemy when they come into her own community. And so I'm wrestling with this one right now. Like I said, she's 4. I couldn't get into a heavy conversation with her right now, right? But it's certainly something that I'm thinking about as she approaches, grade school and in adolescence, because if we stay on the same course, my daughter's gonna be wearing jeans, Jordans, right, hoodies, right, and so therefore, not only is she gonna be gendered a certain way, she's gonna be racialized a certain way, and I need to teach her how to negotiate the space, but I'm not inclined to tell her not to dress a certain way. I've been fully dressed in, professional clothing, and I still had adverse interactions with the police. So I'm not going to tell her that, because I don't want her to think that if she dresses in a way that she thinks is safe, that she will be. I still need her to be vigilant, right? But nevertheless, right, it's something that I dread, but it's something that I know I have to arm her with that knowledge, so she at least understands what's happening.
I think the frustrating thing for me in terms of what to tell my kids is that I'm always brutally honest. I'm always brutally honest, to the point where my kid is probably growing up much faster than he needs to grow up.
Sure.
And, I'm kind of caught in that in-between stage too, because I want you to be what you want to be. And I want you to have a positive perception of those that are supposed to protect. I want you to have that. But I know that we've seen too much.
Right.
Right? We've watched too much.
Right.
So I want you to have a little bit of all of it, right? So I want you to make sure that you know about the George Floyds and the Breonna Taylors, right? I'm with you, Jose. I want to make sure that that you gotta keep your hands on the wheel and make sure to turn the light on and don't reach too fast for something. I want you to know that too. But at the same time, I gotta put you in front of some officers who I know are holding themselves to a higher standard, because I know they're there. I know they're there. I've interacted with them. A little different in my profession, because I just, as a city councilor, I get to have more of those interactions that are positive, right? They want me to be around when folks are celebrating something good. And so I know they're out there, but I feel like I'm in a position where I gotta try to find a way to marry what is real and what you might face with the other side that a lot of people don't see in terms of our officers. So it's definitely a struggle, man.
Yeah.
I just want to jump in. Hearing all the brothers talk about their stories and experiences and all of that, it reminded me of a conversation I had with Jose. And I don't know if he remembers this or not, but had to be right before he was becoming a father. And he said, I asked him, are you ready for this? And he said to me, I just can't wait to teach him. Can't wait till he gets here so I can teach him. And that stuck out to me. And Jose, I don't know if you remember it, but I think about that often, because every day is teaching for my son. He's 4 years old. And right now he's cute. He got a cute little smile, dimples, all that. But he's gonna grow up and he's gonna get bigger. I'm not that tall, so I don't know how tall he's gonna be, but he's gonna get bigger. And James, I think you alluded to it. Some people are gonna look at him as a threat. And I don't really talk to him in baby talk. When him and I interact, he's 4 years old, I talk to him like, he's my boy, still knowing that I'm his father. But I want to expose him to stuff. I want him to understand that there are some bad officers out there. There's definitely some good ones. And I think Justin just talked to that. I wrote down a couple words and just listening to everyone's experience: fear, trauma, experience, distrust, and change. That's my main point with my son, but also my students and any other young people that I come in contact with and get a chance to speak with. It's about change. We know that there are some inequities. We know that there are issues with the criminal justice system, and not just the criminal justice system, because the criminal justice system is a byproduct of what our country has been. This ain't new, y'all. Our country has been this. And so some of the things that we are seeing today were prevalent years ago. In fact, they were norms in our country. How did we, where did this come about? As far as the connection with law enforcement, the criminal justice system, and communities of color. Is it just the criminal justice system, or is it something bigger? And I think when I talk about change, and I talk to my son, and I tell him, you are a Black king. Your mother's a Black queen. Your sister's a Black queen. That's intentional, to boost him up and for him to understand who he is, but also understand that life isn't always roses when you go out of the house, So impacting change, with my son, with students, but I'm gonna tell you, I'm scared to death. And it's not just for the criminal justice system for my son, it's our society. And seeing everything that's been happening, even since, the last, Heart of a Man series, Black and Blue, there's a lot that's going on. So, I'm scared to death, of what he's going to encounter as he gets older. It's hard to tell.
And James, before you move on, let me just highlight for like while we were on this call, I received a message via instant messenger that said, "Good afternoon, sir. You may not know me, but I'm a huge fan of yours. I recorded this interaction between a young man and the Springfield police. I'm not sure what happened, but I was furious by how it was handled as a bystander. You were the first person that I thought to send it to." And then he goes on, but I'm sitting here like, you like I want to, I need to reach for something positive. And maybe that's why I've been, I haven't been maybe that's why my father was silent. Right? Like you want something positive, but then when the irony that it comes up now when we're talking about policing out of the blue, I don't know this person to save my life. And so I guess to your point, Kobe, it's real. It's still happening, and we got to find ways to deal with it, man.
I posted in the chat an article I'm using for my upcoming urban history course. It looks at legal socialization, Black and brown youth, with respect to the police, right? So the premise being many Black and brown youth are in communities that are more heavily policed than our white communities. And they have, by way of personal experience, witnessing other people go through things, right? As well as anecdotes, right? Stories about the ways in which other people have been policed, right? They have a very different socialization experience than do their white counterparts, right? In spaces that are not as heavily policed. And the impact of these interactions and the impact of this socialization, right, stays with them from adolescence through well into adulthood. And it shapes their overall perception of law enforcement, right? And the way in which it shapes these people are primarily it's negative, right? And so those of us here on the panel, right, we've had these negative interactions, but we've all spoken to the ways in which we have reconciled our trauma, right? So that we're not lashing out at police, right? But I'm sure all of us have worked with young men who have not quite yet gained that ability to reconcile, right? I was a hothead until I wasn't, right? But I see in, particularly, Black and Latino male youth, this desire to defend oneself, right? To not be treated as a punk, right? To not be taken advantage of, right? To not look like a coward, right? And if they go into an experience with the police and the police officer is charged and the police officers treat them in any way indicative of what we all have described, right? We are producing, right, what is no doubt a volatile moment, right? Because we are taking for granted that this police officer is being very human while we are denying this young male youth the opportunity to do so. And those are the things that I'm thinking about, right? Those are the things that I think about quite often. Because what we're saying to these young Black and Latino male youth, right? And I know that Black and Latino female youth are no safer, right? But the experiences is different. But what we're saying to these young people is you have to be perfect. You have to be something that you're not actually able to be, right? You have to be completely calm and poised, right, in an experience where people are subjecting you to inhumane treatment. Meanwhile, we're not saying to the police officer who gets paid to go above and beyond, right, who gets paid, right, to, see the big picture, right, that they need to execute their job in a way, right, to where dignity and integrity and humanity are maintained for both parties. And I don't know that that's fair. I would argue that it's not. But I think that that's something that we're experiencing that, and I don't know if there's an effective way we can communicate that to our children.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in here before we transition on that this is one of those, I think, situations where if you're not in the space, and I think all of us have fairly young children, but we have been in contact with some young men to share some of these stories or practices. But thinking about your own children and as they are young, really having to consider how much you expose them to so soon, and also what strategies do you start to put in place to prepare them for the inevitable experience, right? In some way. So they're either going to meet the good cop or they're going to meet the bad cop, and having them, prepared to interact in both situations. I think is key for, for that conversation, if and when it does happen, in some way. So I'm not sure if someone else had anything to share before we transition forward. So I think the next section, it's 2 parts, a little heavier, but we can see. Anything else on this?
No, let's roll, bro.
All right, let's go. All right, so the next question is 2 parts. The first part, what insights can be gained into the difference in law enforcement's responses as we've seen to the January 6th insurrection on the nation's capital, and the Black Lives Matter protests that happened during the summer. Like, looking at those 2 situations, what insights can be gained, or have we gained about police response?
I'm going to say something very specific.
Go for it.
So I read extensively about the backlash, right, or the crackdown of the Black Lives Matter protests, and then I read extensively about the lack thereof on the attack of the Capitol, and I was really interested to hear what law enforcement had to say about the difference in tactic. And my biggest takeaway following the event January 6th is that law enforcement, fearing, right, optics, fearing optics, right, that was their motivation. Fearing optics, did not use as much police, or did not rely on as heavy a police presence or law enforcement presence, right? It had nothing to do with the actual people who attacked the Capitol. It had nothing to do, right, with the actual protesters in the summer. The intel didn't run that deep. It was optics. They really were worried about how it would look on TV if they had as much of a police presence as they had, right, in the summer. Now let's look at this. These 2 groups in particular, all right, the group that started out as a protest that ended up going into the Capitol January 6th, right? These are right wing, right? I'm not gonna call them all extremists, but they were definitely galvanized that day. Proponents of the Second Amendment, quite a few of them had guns that day. They were met as if they didn't. They were treated as if they didn't. They were treated as if they were not angry, gun-toting, right, anti-establishment people who were invading our nation's capital, right? Now let's look at these Black Lives Matter protesters. Black Lives Matter is almost to a fault non-militant. That is not something, they are not the Black Panthers, right? They embody an image that is much closer to the SCLC, right? Martin Luther King, nonviolent civil disobedience, right? Using our bodies to convey an image, right? Our bodies that are being attacked to convey an image, right? There are no guns. And so what that tells me is, regardless of, just generalities that we might speak of in terms of the devaluing of Black life, right? What we have is law enforcement is these folks ain't doing their homework. They don't even know who they're policing. They have no idea who they are responding to. And that's the problem, right? We can talk about how the Blackness of the protesters in the summer, right, was the weapon, right? And we can speak to that, but that doesn't really get us towards solutions, right? The more practical thing that I'm paying attention to, and the thing that really upsets me, is nobody bothered to do their homework on these people. Who's more likely to have a gun? And so what I see there, right, is, and this speaks to something else that we'll talk about here later on, is nobody's doing their homework on these communities. As we're labeling them violent, as we're labeling them terrorists, as we're labeling them thugs, as we're labeling them all these different things, no, but like this, it's mere rhetoric. And it seems to me that we can require, right, not just request, but we can require that our law enforcement actually do their homework, right, on the actual people that they're seeking to police, right? I don't think that that's too much to ask.
I'll jump in and I say the events on January 6th, I'm gonna say the Proud Boys, right? Whether they identify whoever's there, if you were there, you're the Proud Boy, in my opinion. They ruined that day for me. That day culturally to me is Dia de los Reyes, the Three Kings Day. So that's a day in my culture, in my island, of celebration. And here I am, witnessing an attack. But I actually wasn't shocked or surprised. As a matter of fact, I remember having a conversation with close friends of mine and telling them and saying, be prepared. Proud Boys, they coming. Proud Boys gonna do something. If Trump doesn't win, the Proud Boys, they're not just gonna go away quietly, right? So when that happened, that for me it was like an unfortunate "I told you so" moment. Like I knew they was gonna do something. As far as overall difference in response, I think unfortunately I see that as normal, and that actually brings it reminds me of a situation that I was last year, a recent situation in my wife and I, we support multiple sclerosis and we do the walks every year. And because of the pandemic, last year's walk was a virtual walk. So in May, we decided to visit nearby conservation land in Wilbraham. And now I'm a licensed carrier. I'm licensed to carry. And so going through a walk in the woods, I had my legal pistol on me, right? Concealed, because I'm again licensed. And I always emphasize that, I think just because I feel like I have to. But we got there and we met whom I then titled Parking Lot Patty. And Parking Lot Patty, essentially she was of a volunteer community panel of some sort, part of the conservation land board. And she was trying to dictate who could stay, who could go, and how to park. And so it was myself. It was a group of 6 or 7 of us, Latino and Black, and she was trying to get us to go. The situation got a little hostile, and I was scared. Like I was scared of this woman, right? Because I'm like, yo, I have, again, my legally registered pistol on me, but this white woman is getting hostile, and I was scared, right? And I'm thinking to myself, I want to go home. Like I got to get out of here, right? She's gonna call the police, and it's over, right? They don't show up, and it's over. And you know what happened on January 6th, right? And the responses to both movements, protests, and riot, right? Because January 6th was a riot. For me, that's normal. And when it reminded me of that internet, that virtual walk with parking lot Patty, I mean, it was just like, yeah, that's how they respond to us. Unfortunately, that's, and I hope it changes, but I don't know that I see it changing, at least in my lifetime.
I would just say that I think there's an inherent presumption uh, from law enforcement that folks of color are violent. Um, and you know, when I think about and I don't think it goes both ways. Yes, Dr. Guillory, they didn't do their homework. They also didn't anticipate that they would assault one of their own, or kill one of their own and assault one of their own. But when I think of folks organizing around issues that pertain to the Black and Brown community, I think folks are always met with more or the fear that violence might ensue. And I think they go into it thinking of it. And I remember when we protested at Nathan Bill's here in Springfield, because that was the same place where 4 men were beaten to a pulp.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting here like I know Springfield hasn't had a protest in a long time. Actually, they had the young people a couple days before, but they haven't had an issue where folks were protesting quite like they were after the George Floyd incident. And I'm looking at the SWAT team that strategically surrounded us, the cameras that were placed throughout the plaza. I'm looking at the come to find out that National Guard was stationed over at St. Anthony's around the corner. And I'm saying to myself, are you for real? I mean, I know the residents of Springfield. We ain't there yet. You know, maybe we should be there. But we ain't there yet. And I'm like, you got all of this firepower around this protest? I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand. And I think that's throughout the country.
Justin, do
Go
you
ahead.
think that response is because they feared you as a threat, or did they just want to meet you with overwhelming force?
I would argue,
Because I'm looking at not just,
Yeah.
so let's look at this globally,
yeah,
right? Let's look at spaces where you have pogroms, right? Genocide,
mhm,
right? Ethnic cleansing, right? And you have this overwhelming military presence towards, being directed towards a marginalized community. We've already, like, you're neutralized, you're marginalized, right? However much you could tear up your side of Springfield, but how much damage could you possibly do? But if you're telling me that they got SWAT alone can take out Pine Point, we know that, right? So when we see that, and when we see these militarized police forces throughout the country, right? And then we look and see how they are similar to other places in the world, South Africa, Eastern Europe, right? We're starting to see we're seeing some of this stuff, some of this stuff is coming out of Asia, right? Again, is it because they view you as a threat that requires that type of military response? Or are they just simply trying to subjugate you?
So, I think the police department was definitely just trying to subjugate us, right? I think they were trying to, I think they were trying to put fear in folks' heart before it even started. I don't think they were that concerned from a fear standpoint of us, but I think carrying the perception or continuing the perception that folks are violent, folks of color are violent for those that are looking on or that were watching it. I think they wanted to accomplish that too, and certainly.
Like I see that being used as a narrative to explain why they did it to y'all, right? So you know how lynching worked. Well, we would explain after the fact why you were strung up on a tree, right? But in terms of like, the actual threat itself, like is that rhetoric, or is that right? Or is that
But
real?
I think folks are believing the rhetoric, right? I think folks outside are believing the rhetoric. And as long as you got folks that are believing the rhetoric, then they're going to continue. They want, I think there are certain folks that want that rhetoric continued, right? They want folks to believe that.
You look at the police department in LA, right, and how they were, they were getting in a lot of trouble using that chokehold method back in the 90s. And the explanation often offered was, well, when they're high on PCP, they become almost like superhuman, right? Now, come on now, really? Like, who's going to mess with, a 6-foot dude from Watts that is garnering superhuman strength? That's not going to happen, right? And you for damn sure not going to be able to choke him out with a nightstick. But, all right, to your point, right, to explain after the fact why we had to execute him, right? We can then play on how he's dangerous, and then those that are not in law enforcement, those that are bystanders, those that live places like West Springfield, or perhaps even place, areas of 16 acres of Wilbraham, right? They're going to be able to say, oh, okay, yeah, well, that was necessary, right? But in terms of the actual police, or the militarized version of the police, right? That's what I'm asking you. Like, do you really think that they were afraid, or do they do what they did because they could get away with it?
Anthony, if I can just jump in, I want to make this one comment because as you guys are speaking, KRS One pops in my mind, and I think, and I remember that Justin, Nathan Bill's incident and the protest. The way I see it is the overseer became the officer, right? And the officer showed up to remind us that they're still the overseer, and I've always kind of felt that, and so I think that's, in my opinion, that's what I see, right? The overseer became the officer, and the officer is just there to, as you said, Justin. I don't think they were necessarily scared, but they're there to remind you that we're still the overseer, and so let me keep you in check, right?
Yeah, I think
we could call them the overseer, right? Which suggests that they're organic to the plantation. But we can also call them an outside occupying force, suggesting that we're inside a colonial network.
And there's a perception of, obviously the optics, a presence of power, not wanting to relinquish that power. And power holds true in many different forms. You're talking police, political, especially you're talking about insurrection. I have former students who are Capitol Police. I've been in the Capitol building several times. Anybody that's been there knows the amount of security that's there all the time. So when I walk into the living room and I glance at the TV on January 6th and I see that, how did this happen? How is this going on? And another thought in my head was, if this were people of color, we have a lot of casualties on the Capitol steps. where were all the police? Where were all the officers? And it's a directive. But somebody wanted to control that, right? We're in trouble. We're in trouble in our society.
I would say they wouldn't
You know?
even made it to the steps. They'd
Yeah,
have been part of the lawn.
right.
They wouldn't have
And
made it to
even
the
making it
steps.
that far, you know what I
Right.
mean? So you see, I mean, this is all throughout the history. This is just entrenched in parts of pockets of our country for many years, you know. That's why I talk about change. And then you hear folks about, you know, the events over the summer. And I was having a conversation with someone, and I said, if somebody was poking you in your head every day, at some point you're gonna snap. At some point you're gonna say, I've had enough.
And so
There's
I
a
want to,
go ahead,
I'm sorry, I
James.
want to cut you off. Go ahead, finish. I have
No,
one
no, no.
follow up to this.
I'm just saying, you know,
no,
so,
it's so
there's a frustration with communities of color and people of color, but there has to be some change and some reform in this criminal justice system and with policing, and even just, you know, our society as a whole. Like, you know, where do we go from here?
mhm.
You know, because there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of, you know, margin and people, you know, saying, oh yeah, let's support. But I think we're past the talking now. What do we put in place to make things right? What do we do to make this better? Into police are there to protect and serve and to help folks in trouble, not just non-folks of color, but everybody, right? How do we make it better? But we got a long way to go.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know we're running short on time, so I do want to get through one more question, just to provide our listening audience some takeaways. But if you gentlemen have, you know, probably 15 minutes after the 4 o'clock hour, so that we can get that and add this to the recording, that would be great, just so that we can get to all this. But I really wanted to kind of, you know, Kobe, you kind of summarized what we're leading to, but we do want to get into more detail around police response as it relates to communities of color. And Justin started to allude to a little bit of that. So is Anthony, but I want to allow us the opportunity to go deeper, but we may do that after the 4 o'clock hour. But just to kind of give our audience and give some space for resolution, right? What do you feel is needed for police to build trust in communities of color?
I'm gonna say something bold. I'm only adjunct now, so if y'all fire me, whatever. I think the police nationally need to renounce Blue Lives Matter as a rallying cry. It's a counter-hegemonic response to Black Lives Matter. It's something that suggests that people who adorn their uniforms, right, are somehow inherently or biologically linked to that uniform. Or they're suggesting that we could take off our blackness. And both seem absurd to me. I think that we need to demilitarize our police, right? I'm not calling for defunding the police, which is a popular thing to say down here in Texas, but I don't think our police department needs tanks. I don't think our police department needs to be equipped to go into somebody's apartment as if they're going into a cave to get an international terrorist. I don't think that that's necessary. I also think that police, y'all know better than I do. How much are police getting paid up there? 55, 60,000?
Overtime?
It ain't 30.
6 figures?
Okay, yeah, all right. It ain't 30 though, right? Okay, so what I'm suggesting then is in order to be qualified to be a police officer, I think you need to undergo training, right, that enables you, right, to interrogate the history of this country, the history of the communities that you police, right? And I think you need to be able to, and I think it needs to afford them opportunities to engage in cultural enrichment opportunities on a regular basis so that they can be, right, submerged into the communities that they police. As I spoke to before, right, this concept of an outside occupying force, right? I don't want some dude, right, from the sticks close to close to Amherst being able to come into Springfield to police that population, right? Unless, right, she or he could show me their credentials that allow them to be able to speak to that dynamic, right? We heard several officers say over the last few years, right, in response to killing children, well, I feared for my life. Just because they were there? I'm not gonna say that that's impossible, but the only way that is possible is is for you to be ignorant of the population, right? And so those are the three things that I would argue that almost 3 to 4 things that we need. Academic training and cultural enrichment on a regular basis, almost like continuing ed, the way we treat nurses, right, and personal trainers for that matter. Where on an ongoing basis you are getting education, right? Demilitarization of the police across the board, and then again the renouncing of Blue Lives Matter as a counter-hegemonic response to Black Lives Matter. And if that was the last thing I said as a stick employee, it was good knowing you.
Nah.
Oh man, I love it. I love it. I love it, Doctor. I think now's the time where we have to speak up. And so if there was ever a time, for you to potentially put your job on the line, is right now. And I think one of the most frustrating things that I've encountered after, after the death of George Floyd and after this insurrection, it's like we need to be pushing harder than ever right now. We need to be demanding reform harder than ever. If you're a politician and you're silent, I have a problem with that. If you're a politician of color and you're silent, then you ought to be voted out. I mean, it's just it's just the nature of the beast right now. Right now, we have an opportunity. I'm a bit more optimistic than some. Right now, I think there's an opportunity for significant change and reform. I think, unfortunately, it took the death of George Floyd for some of that to happen. Certainly excited that Mass passed the police reform bill. So I certainly think that all of that is helpful. But I agree with a lot of what the doctor said. I mean, in terms of, we've been fighting for residency and just recently got residency for our officers now, but you have a ton of officers that were grandfathered in here in Springfield. And so, I certainly think that'll help. And I also think we just need to reimagine policing in general. What calls are police officers going out on, and why? And are there ways in which, we can have folks who are trained in what they need to be trained in, going out and addressing those calls for service as opposed to our police? And so are we, can we not put them in positions to interact in a negative manner with our community if we can help it? And so I think we need to do a better job in terms of how the role in which we see our police officers playing in our community. And I can't stress enough, that starts at the top. We just got to keep pushing for it.
Justin, I like, what you said. Police have an extremely difficult job. But being entrenched in the community, what does community policing look like? How do we implement it? How do we invest? How does the police department invest in the community that they serve? I think that's where a lot, some of that fear comes from. And then we talk about training. They need to be trained. But I think education, I think Anthony talked about this earlier, educating on a lot of different levels with police departments. But I would even take it a step further, talking about educating in colleges. You have a lot of these, you know, college students majoring in criminal justice who want to go out and work in these fields. So I hold myself accountable to help, and I don't look at my classes as classes. I look at it as training. Criminal justice is a different type of discipline, right? I'm training these potential or students to be potential officers, good officers, quality officers. But I also think that it starts earlier than that as well. We don't have after school programs. We don't have things for our kids to do. There's a divide, y'all. And it's going to take a lot of work. But I agree with Justin, you know, it starts at the top. And how do we develop it? You know, but this is the time to do it. Anthony, I really respect, you know, you putting your job on the line, man. And I think that's admirable. No, and I'm serious because you're speaking on something that's passionate and that's trying to impact change. And there's some folks who jump on it just to jump on it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You have to be serious about it. And I think we all are on this panel. So I definitely admire that. But again, education, reform, and not defunding. I'm talking about reforming and allocating some of those funds just to make our communities better, make the department better. I mean, we still got some good police officers, y'all.
Sure.
They ain't all bad. You know, again, how do we impact change?
If I can jump in really quickly, and I agree with all three of y'all, and like Dr. Guillory and Justin Hurst said, right, of putting your jobs on the line. You know, one thing that I always say is I'll always have a job. It might not be a stick, but I'll always have a job because I can walk. My arms work. I have a pickup truck. I have a commercial lawnmower. I'm gonna work. My mortgage is gonna get paid. My son's gonna eat. No fear. My father was a landscaper. He taught me how to, you know what I mean? No fear. So I'll always have a job. Where that employer will be, that doesn't really matter. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it's now we have to get that fear of either retaliation or I'm held and I can't. There's no more can't. You just gotta you just gotta say it, right? We just gotta call it. We just gotta call it out, whether we like it or not. And if you choose not to employ me anymore, then that's fine. I'm still gonna pay my mortgage. I'm still gonna eat. It just might not be with your funds, but I'll get the funds. I think that I would like to just say this when it comes to education, because I think education is key. Education is important. One thing that I've never understood is that in higher education, you require a master's degree to be an academic advisor, right? So you need a master's degree to advise students on what classes they need to take to graduate. But to become a state trooper in Massachusetts, you need a GED. Right, to serve and protect, all right, you need a GED, but to advise a student on how to read an academic plan of study and choose classes appropriately, you need a master's degree. I don't know why we don't hold law enforcement officers to that high level of a standard. Why isn't there a specific minimum degree, extensive education licensure that you require? And like Dr. Guillory said, continuing education, you must maintain that in order to continue to be a police officer. But rather just you can be a high school dropout and just go get your GED and then be arguably one of the most powerful people across the state. It never made sense to me.
And if I could just add, I think we need more folks in law enforcement that look like us.
Yeah.
Right. Along with knowing the community that you're serving in, it also would be nice if they looked like us and not just look like us as a line officer. I mean, look like us in supervisory roles where they're actually making policy decisions.
Right.
So we have a diverse force here in Springfield. There's no doubt about it. Which was because of a consent decree by the federal government a while back. That's the only reason why we have it. However, our supervisory positions are not, they're not diverse at all. And that is a problem.
Well, Justin, just to piggyback off that, we need to get students, or we get people interested, right? Because of the disconnect with police and law enforcement, nobody wants to touch that. You know, I do my best to get out to the communities and talk to students, and I recruit. No shame in my game. I'm recruiting students, come to Nantucket Community College, be a part of this criminal justice program. You know, let's be a part of the change. Let's try to make this right. You know, if you don't like what's going on, let's try to do something about it.
Yeah. And thanks, Kobe, for that. And I'm going to wrap us up here, and we will have some conversation after after our guests leave, to kind of continue this conversation a little bit for a few moments. And just something I shared in the previous segment here, and it alludes to what you all were just saying, is that the representation matters, right? So we're talking about in our last Heart of the Man around education, and how they're not enough representation of Black men within that space. Or it's opposite. They always go to administration, but they're not in the classroom, who have like a direct impact. And so in this case, it's reverse, right? So we're doing the direct service, but not in a position to direct the service, if you will. So we'll have some more conversation. I just want to thank you all right now for all that you've shared, the great conversation. Of course, we ran close on time because there's so much knowledge in the room, in the space to be shared, and much more that we'll look to share, I guess, in our next conversations. But I want to transition over to Cindy. We didn't get a lot of questions, but we did get a lot of questions, but we did get some our audience showing some love to you, and very thankful for the stories you shared. But I will transition over to Cindy so she can close us out, and then I'll come back to you with some follow-up. But thank you all again.
Yes, thank you all so much. Just a deep and heartfelt gratitude to all of our panelists. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as is almost always the case in being a part of the Heart of a Man series, I am just full of your words, your stories, and my heart, my head, my body, just all of me is full, feeling through the conversation that I have been so honored to witness and listen to today. Thank you to all of the attendees who have stayed this long. Please, we're closing out, but I want you to take this moment before you go. The most important thing I would ask is put something in the chat, share some love with our panelists. And if you are willing, put one thing in that chat that you are taking from what you heard today. So you might be able to name the person who said it or not, but what is something that you are carrying with you as we close out this space together? So please go ahead and put that in the chat as I'm saying a few more words to end our session. I want to say that your feedback is incredibly important to us. Please do fill out the survey link. You're going to get something. It'll probably say it's from me, I think, and or from Zoom, but you'll be getting an email immediately after the session with a survey link. This initiative doesn't feel so brand new anymore now that we're in our sort of second season of the series, but your feedback is always essential to us to help us know, again, what you're taking from this experience and things that you would like to see in the future. And that always is something that we can use to build and strengthen the dialogue together. So last but not least, and again, if you haven't yet, please plug your reflections into the chat. But our next session that we wholeheartedly invite you all to join us for is going to be on April 8th at 2 p.m. And it happens to fall within Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And so for this next session, we're going to be doing a deep dive and a direct dive into men's role in ending gender-based violence, which is obviously deeply intersected with our conversation today and conversations we've had in the past. That session is entitled Changing Hearts. And you can visit the Heart of a Man webpage for more information to register for that upcoming session or any of the upcoming sessions of the series. So again, thank you so much for being present, for listening, for engaging, and I hope you all have an excellent afternoon.
Somebody said these conversations are hard and tough. They're not all that hard to be anymore. I'll be honest with you. They're not all that hard to be. I think I've been doing it a little bit longer. So hard to hear, I imagine. You know, if you don't hear this type of conversation on a regular basis, if you don't read about this stuff, you know, I imagine it could be jarring, but wasn't all that hard. I'm not even gonna lie.
Justin, didn't you say in the last one, you say read? Folks need to read, right? Quote when you, right? Oh, yeah, Anthony, I agree with you. Like these conversations aren't hard. This is real.
Yeah.
This is reality, and this is where we're at. You know, exposing folks to it. Like this stuff causes people to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And look at themselves, which is hard to do. That's hard. The conversation ain't hard.
Yeah.
That's hard.
You know, like, I mean, as you know, 5 men, we could be sitting here, we could talk about a bunch of different things, right? Some we may or may not want other people to hear us talking about, but I don't know. I mean, like I said, you reach a certain point where you recognize that some acts are just futile in nature and that others are more purpose driven. And I'm just, you know, I'm at a point now where I only want to do the stuff that's gonna move the needle. You know what I'm saying? And
Be intentional.
you know,
Yeah.
so once I committed to that, man, it's like, it ain't not all that hard at all. Because this is really the only stuff I want to talk about. You know, as cool as I think, you know, the new shoe is, or as pretty as I think the next woman is, or as much as I love the Lakers, whatever it is we might want to talk about, right? Like that just, I don't feel like I should be discussing that. You know what I'm saying? So there's this kid, I live in a suburb of Dallas, and so immediately south of me is this place called Plano, and this kid is, you know, it snowed down here, and we don't have an infrastructure for that. And so this kid had to work, like 17-year-old kid, and to work at one of these service industry jobs down the street. I can't remember which one it is. Well, anyway, so he's walking home, and he feels like it's safer for him to walk in the street than it is on the sidewalk, okay? Because of all the snow and ice and everything. Well, evidently somebody put in a wellness check for this young man. And the police go out there and they show up and they arrested him and put him in jail. All right. And so the next day, right, the police chief said that they released him and no charges will be filed because that's not what the officers were intended to go out there and do. But I feel like they should have known that when they went out there. And then when they showed up with this boy to the police station, somebody else should have said, hey, you went out there on a wellness check. And then when they booked him, and then when they brought him food, and like somebody should have, at all these different steps, somebody should have said, hey, he's supposed to be getting a wellness check, right? And it didn't happen. And so, you know, being privy to that, you know, yeah, we need to talk about this stuff. And it, you know, hard. I don't know. I don't mean, you know, forgive my, you know, my masculine, right, you know, chauvinistic, right, expression, but, you know, I'm a grown ass man. I can't be worried about what's hard. I got to do what I got to do. And this is just part of it for me. You know, if I'm not speaking out against this kind of stuff, or how many other little boys coming home from work, right? Again, this is Texas. We don't have infrastructure for snow. God bless the little boy, even trying to walk through the snow to get home, right? He went above and beyond further than I did that day because I wasn't walking anywhere. I was right here, you know? So, you know, but to find out that this little boy was arrested and put it and had to spend a night in jail. Because, you know, because the police officers, you know, I get they just forgot what they were out there to do. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
And so as you're talking, Anthony, like you diving right into what, you know, we're going to have this conversation about how this looks in our communities, you know, how police are responding to issues, you know, in communities as it relates to, you know, the racial disparities in the arrests or convictions, you know, similar to what you just said, right? So young man just doing what he has to do, and now they're showing up for or responding in an opposite way of, you know, what they were called for. How the rest of you looking into or seeing that in your communities? And so some of you are in like Springfield, but you know, you may be in a different neighborhood or have a different experience.
You talking about Cindy's question?
Yeah. Yep. So that was the follow up to the, you know, insurrection and Black Lives Matter protests.
So I had all right, when I lived here, before I left to move to New England, I remember my mom had this boyfriend, live-in boyfriend, and he beat her up. And I don't know if she called the police or not, but it was a loud enough ruckus to where I feel like somebody should have. But police weren't called. And I remember having a conversation like this as an undergraduate, but there are a lot of cops on the panel, right? And I remember this one cop saying to me that that the reason why the police weren't going to go out to respond to that domestic violence call is because oftentimes it's the woman that comes and bails the man out of jail, right? So the argument was, we're not going to respond to the call at all because too many times for their liking, it's the woman who calls that comes and bails the man out of jail, okay? Fast forward, I'm there at Stick, it's the summer, and I get a phone call from a number I didn't recognize, and it was rather late at night, and I didn't answer, and then the person called back a few times, and then finally I answered. It was the kid's sister of a former student of mine. I, you know, was mentoring him through Mile, and I gave him my number. You know, you need me, you call me. You know, I had spoken to him. We had hung out a few times. Our families got together a couple of times, but it had been a while since I'd heard from him. Well, anyway, it's his kid's sister. She calls and she says, you know, such and such was just thrown in jail. So what the hell happened? He and his live-in girlfriend had got into a dispute, an argument. She was supposed to fill out some paperwork for their kid to go to like a Montessori school or something like that. She didn't do it. The young man, through things like Mile, right? He got his CJ degree. He was thinking about going over to Westfield. He had his own business. So he's thinking being upwardly mobile. And he's frustrated because he feels like his partner isn't doing her part to like help him progress. And so for him, that was the last straw. So he broke up with her, said, we got to end this, right? You're still the mother of my child, but we got to end this. She responds by calling the police and saying that he pulled a gun on her and the kids. The police call him. They say, you have to turn in your firearm. He does that. And they immediately arrested him, threw him in jail. He was in jail 4 days before I saw him. And I know this because I had to go play. They asked me, the family asked me to go and give a character witness for the young man. Mind you, I've been with both of them together. Okay, like I've been with him and his, his living girlfriend together. I've never seen violence between any one of them, right? They got along extremely well, and they got along extremely well with us, right? But I do know, right, that he was frustrated with how comfortable she was as opposed to where he was trying to go. She didn't go to school, right? She just didn't have the desire to do so. She didn't work, right? And that was starting to bother him for one reason or the other, right? And so what I see is two totally different experiences with the police, very totally different responses from the police with respect to domestic violence. On the one hand, it was, a male officer saying, right, that the problem with these domestic violence calls is that the women, right, are often, coming to get the men out of jail. But on the flip side, right, when I got to Springfield, it was a female prosecutor who had a reputation for throwing young Black and Latino men in jail, and keeping them there, right, after such false accusations were made. And I think that we could do better with that. I think that going back to education, and I think that purging people who have biases, right? Men who have biases against women, women that have biases against men, right? People who have biases against people of color, right? I think we need all of that, and I also think that, right, we need education. We need to re-educate these people in these positions where they can drastically shape the outcome of these potentially criminal justice, criminal cases, right, that could drastically alter people's lived experiences.
Word. Thanks for that. Any other panelists respond to that one? Or I just sent you a message because Anthony started to respond to some of the other issues that we were going to allude to around the domestic violence and, kind of those mental health calls. A lot of the questions kind of started to sum up because your experiences, integrate so good with how we're trying to, kind of get your responses from this. So any other panelists responding to, how they've seen this playing out in the communities of color, like police response, and then, how is the race, class, and gender stereotype shaping those responses, whether it be domestic violence call or a mental health call?
I just think we suffer from a lack of adequate training. I think we spoke about it earlier.
Yeah.
I think that we need to rethink policing in general, especially around mental health. I think there are a lot of times in which, we could do our officers more justice by not having them show up to places in which they're not capable of performing the task that needs to be performed. And I think if you couple that with just receiving more professional development that allows you to deal with these situations in a different manner, you'll be better equipped to respond appropriately.
I think that's right on. Just training and exposure. I mean, I remember working at corrections and I had an inmate tell me, Kobe, why don't you come in here and put your feet up, lock us in when we do something wrong and do what other guys do. My undergrad in psychology, I wanted to be a counselor. You know what I mean? So I took that approach. Not only that, I knew half the folks in there, but also I wanted to help. Like I had a different mind frame around this stuff. Not everybody has that, and so trying to, educate and train and, you talk about somebody responding to a mental health situation. they don't know what to do. The training doesn't take care of that. Training doesn't tell you how to handle this. They may have started some of that training, but you need intensive, extensive training to handle mental health situations.
Yeah, so when I got back to Texas, I worked in a school district, and look, everybody that I saw, including myself, was undertrained with, regarding some of the things that we would experience, some of the dynamics we face, but particularly for students who suffer from mental health issues. There was such a lack of trained and competent people to de-escalate, right, these moments, to redirect, right? And we're talking about children, right? So I taught 7th graders, so 11, 12 years old, right? There was a couple who had been left back, they were 13, but nevertheless, we're talking about babies to me, right? And I remember one moment, there's this young man, and he had been held back. So he was in the 8th, he should be in the 9th. And he's mad. He's very, very upset. Somebody says, this was early in the morning, and he's mad and he's pacing, and he looks like he's about to fight somebody. And so they call in the police officer, they call in the assistant principal and everything like that. And they're standing at a distance, right, to like absorb whatever it is that he's about to do. And I'm coming in, I was doing whatever the monitoring is, the bus monitoring or whatever. So I come in and I see this unfolding, and I see everybody around him, and I see how they're treating him like he's a monster, and he's playing into this role of being the monster, right? The fear monger. And so, again, but he's a baby. And so I just go up to the kid and I put my arms around him and I just held him in my embrace. No, I wasn't trained to do that, right? But something told me I need to treat this kid like he's a human being. And he's telling me, like, they did this and they did this. And I said, I understand, I do. And I know that hurt. I know that felt bad. I know that was painful. But they did this, and I'm just so tired of this. And he said this, I'm trying to do better this year. They mess with me and I'm trying to do better this year. And I said, but you are doing better. I said, I admire your strength. I see you're not trying to get involved. I see you're not trying, right, to make things worse. I see that you're under control. And I said, what can I do for you? It's a question I asked this young man. What can I do for you? And he said, I don't want them messing with me. So I asked his teacher for a few minutes so I can talk to him. All right. I told the assistant principal, I said, I got it. We'll be okay. The police officer walks away. But that was a potentially dreadful moment because they were ready to criminalize this little boy. And they were ready to treat this little boy as if he was a criminal. All right. There was another instance where I was not involved. I only heard about it after the fact, but they talked to me about it as if it was cool to do so. But the security guard, not the police, but the security guard had thrown a little boy like through the room. Like they pulled him behind closed doors, and he had hit somebody. So I guess they gave them open access, and they're slinging this little boy. He's malnourished. It looks like, he has some developmental issues. He's kind of effeminate. And I mentioned that because when they were talking about it after the fact, they were like, yeah, I beat that little faggot boy. I'm like, whoa, my dude, like, whoa, where are we at, man? It's so, granted, yeah, education, but we also need to purge these folks that are doing this damage on the ground, right? Where they come in and they're operating under this lens, under this gaze that like, oh, well, this is a population we can do this to, right? Because it starts with these young children, right? And the way in which they're socialized. And it's oftentimes, right, the article I mentioned earlier, right, says that it's the school administrator and the liaison officer that provide like a united front. And that becomes a representation of the state for these young people, right? so we got to address those things, right? We got to make sure that whoever's at the helm, right, not just the law enforcement agent, right, but also the principal, the assistant principal, the teacher, they need to be, right, retrained so as not to view. And mind you, I worked in a primarily Black school, or at least in terms of the staff was Black. The students were Black and Latino, right? But but there's the training needs to start there, right? We need to not view the children that we say represent our community, right, as little criminals that can be subjected to such treatment.
Yeah. Justin, like you want to?
No, I was just going to say it's interesting how these, how a lot of what we're asking for from police officers, we oftentimes ask for from our teachers as well. And, they're both extremely difficult professions, but I think one of the ways in which you get around a lot of that, which is, I think, which is what Dr. Guillory was saying, is that you got to care, right? Like you actually have to care. You have to want to see those individuals being productive citizens.
Sure.
Right? And if you don't want to do that, then you shouldn't be in the profession. And if they know that you don't care, then why would they do right?
Right.
Why would they stop doing what it is that we all don't want them to do?
Right.
And it's just it's not easy. But for me, that's base. And I don't know how you get to that point, but whether it was teaching or I'd imagine being a police officer, or how about just being, I don't care what profession it is you're in.
Sure.
How about you just gotta care?
Yeah. Right.
And you gotta want folks to do better. And if you come in with these implicit biases, you're starting at a deficit that could prove devastating.
Absolutely.
That's why a lot of times I say this is bigger than the criminal justice system. This is just a byproduct. We got education, which is a whole nother entity that, you talk about training. When these teachers get licenses, they go to get their master's degrees. How much classroom management do they talk about? How much of this do they talk about in training, right? Are they trained? It's these students come to school with a whole different type of baggage. And when they get to the school door, now working every level of education, elementary on to higher ed. They get to the school door, you see a kid possibly with a backpack. He could have a frown on his face. But you don't know what happened to that kid or what that kid had gone through before he got to the front of the school. But then, to your point, do you care? Right? A lot of times it's, all right, get in here, you late, you act up, we calling your parent, we calling the school police officer, we calling cops. There's a reason why they're acting like that. There's a reason why they feel like that. Sometimes kids are hungry. Before they get to school. And there's so much to this, and then it's a systemic, right? It's almost like a domino effect. And having worked in education and worked in juvenile detention and worked in corrections and connected with a lot of police and state police and all, this is all connected.
So I as you're saying this, I think about my time running the camp, right? And I looked at my role as like I'm the sheriff, right? So everything I say goes. But who had the most, I'll say, authority or responsibility was my lifeguards, right? And so I'm looking at, as I'm hearing you all, right? So they have this responsibility to protect these campers, to teach them, but the level of training that is required and the expectation is so high, it's well beyond me. Mm-hmm. Like they have this capacity to do way more. Like I can swim, but I don't jump in 12 feet of water, unless it's my own child. That's the only way that's happening, right? But they've had this training and they've practiced it and they're like ready to go. And they know how to observe or prepare for this before it gets too bad, right? So they're looking, they're scanning, they're watching, they're familiar with the population that they're working with, so that at any moment they're ready to step in and say, yo, Johnny, Lil James, Xavier, whoever, like, that's not your space. Like, don't go there, right? Or they have some intervention, there's a line, there's a rope, like, don't go that far, because we know what will happen if you go there. And, as you all have said, like, education, and training, like, a part of this is that they have yet to learn to work with people, right? They learn the tactical force, right, to prevent or to stop, but the actual, like, communication portion of it, or the engagement, right? So a police officer comes to me and says, hey, yo, James, or hey, yo, young man, I don't want this to end in an altercation. I need to know what's happening, so we'll know how to move. You seem to be upset. You seem to be having some challenges right now. I'm gonna move a little closer so that, we can talk about what's going on, right? That's a skill that I'm not sure is happening in that training, right? Anthony, you mentioned that, right? I've had to give a number of, like, embraces to be like, yo, calm yourself down, chill. Let's work through this and see what's happening. And so I just wanted to, jump in and give that input. Like, I think, as you all talking about this education and that training, I was thinking of those lifeguards, of like how they put themselves in this position, but they're in there the entire time. And that one element is that they know how to work with the folks that they're responsible for.
One last thing, James, I know you're trying to wrap up, but that's also paying attention to, and I guess it goes along with caring. You know what students to give a hug to. You know which ones to kick them in their butt. You know which ones you need to have a conversation with. You know which ones, but you only get that if you're actually paying attention and you're invested. That's leadership 101, right? Y'all all leaders, right? You know what I mean? So if you're paying attention and you're invested, just like even with your kids. Sometimes I know, all right, let me let him have his space. Sometimes I'm gonna go get him. And sometimes I'm gonna give him a hug. And y'all all know this. And that's just the basics of what we're dealing with. I'm gonna shut up so you can get out of here, Jamie.
Again, thank you all so much. As we ended the first part of this, we're like, man, this conversation can keep going. So don't be surprised if we call you up or want some more info to keep adding to this. I think the folks who get a chance to watch this or listen, will get a lot and be ready to move to action, and hopefully hold those folks who we're discussing accountable for what they're doing. I know we don't have that authority, it usually lands in the courts, but at least, you have a city council member or, one of you all run for city council so that you can be in that position to have those conversations or empower, future generations to, position themselves, so thank you all again. And I'm sure you'll be hearing from us in the future.
Yeah, it was a
Appreciate
pleasure.
you.
All right.
Thanks, y'all. It's a
Absolutely.
pleasure.
I appreciate you guys.
Definitely a pleasure.
Justin, I'm gonna hit you up.
No doubt, no doubt. I'm ready for the golf.
Jose, let's get there. Anthony, it's a pleasure to meet you, brother.
Is Veterans Open yet? Let's go.
And not yet, I don't think so.
All right.
All right.
All right,
now.
y'all.
Thanks,
Take
everybody.
care.